Hello and welcome to the Political Dispatch, the podcast that explores big issues and ideas in a conversational way.
My name is Lily Mott.
I'm Sid Kurapati.
And I'm Tom Spare.
In each episode, we'll guide you through a compelling topic examining the politics, policies, and key players involved.
So, on 29th December 2024, James Earl Carter Jr., known to the world as Jimmy Carter, passed away at his home in Plains, Georgia, aged 100 years old.
In this first episode of 2025, we wanted to discuss and celebrate the extraordinary life, presidency, and legacy of the 39th President of the United States.
On President Carter's passing, there was a huge swell of dedications and public outpouring for a man who famously said he was forced into involuntary retirement by losing to Ronald Reagan in the 1980 presidential election.
President Carter once said, "In our democracy, the only title higher and more powerful than that of president is the title of citizen. It is every citizen's right and duty to help shape the future legacy of our nation," which I think ties in very well to the last episode that we did. So a little bit more uplifting than our last episode that we ended.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm.
Jimmy Carter was a man of integrity and humility at a time of scandal and turmoil in the United States. His presidency was wedged between the tainted half-term of Gerald Ford and the laissez-faire Ronald Reagan. In fact, President Carter was the sole Democrat to occupy 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue between 1969 and 1993, making his rise to the highest office in the land that much more remarkable.
So Jimmy Carter was born on the 1st of October 1924 in Plains, Georgia, a small rural town that shaped his values and his character. He grew up on a peanut farm. His father's modest means taught him the importance of hard work and community. A voracious reader and strong student, Carter attended the US Naval Academy, graduating in 1946. He served as a Navy officer working on early nuclear submarine programs, and then he returned to Plains after his father's death in 1953. I think his father died prematurely, and actually, his whole family on his dad's side has a history of cancer. So a lot of them were died from cancer. So he took over the running of the family farm, which he then transformed into a profitable business. And I believe he also sort of modernized it as well. He was a devout Baptist. Carter's faith played a really central role throughout his life and influenced his moral compass, which is represented in his presidency, but also his post-presidency work too.
And Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind were married for 77 years, and she was one of his closest advisors and confidants. They had 4 children together, and their youngest daughter, Amy, read a letter from her father to her mother at Rosalind's funeral. Aw. The letter sent while Carter was serving in the Navy read, "My darling, every time I have ever been away from you, I have been thrilled when I return to discover just how wonderful you are. While I am away, I try to convince myself that you really are not, could not be as sweet and beautiful as I remember. But when I see you, I fall in love with you all over again. Does that seem strange to you? It doesn't to me. Goodbye, darling. Until tomorrow, Jimmy." Oh,
That is
Yeah,
so sweet.
that's so
I had
sweet.
I had to get you to read that, Lily, because I
So
originally
sweet.
had me reading it and I would have cried the whole way through. So well done for getting through that. Mm.
Yeah. And when we transition from his personal life to his political career, Jimmy Carter entered politics in 1962, winning a seat in the Georgia State Senate, where he advocated for desegregation and civil rights. He lost his first bid for governor in 66, but then again, he ran successfully in 1970, positioning himself as a moderate on racial issues. As Georgia's governor from 71 to 75, he championed education reform, government efficiency, and racial reconciliation. He gained national attention with his integrity and outsider image, which resonated especially after the Watergate scandal. After announcing his presidential campaign in 1974, few expected him to win due to his lack of national prominence. However, he leveraged his grassroots campaigning and the support of the southern states to defeat Gerald Ford in the 1976 election.
And actually, when you look at the map of the electoral map in 1976, it's really wild to see how different it is today. It's sort of like the opposite of what we would expect from elections today. So that's worth looking and having a Google afterwards. As president, Jimmy Carter's key achievements included the brokering of the Camp David Accords in 1978, securing peace between Israel and Egypt, which was a really historic diplomatic achievement. He established the Department of Energy to address the energy crisis and focus on renewable resources. He signed the Panama Canal treaties, paving way for the US to transfer control of the canal to Panama by 1999. And he focused on human rights, making it a cornerstone of US foreign policy, particularly in Latin America and Africa. And he did, subsequent to his presidency, always highlighted the fact that there weren't any sort of open conflicts during his presidency, although there were record amounts of investment in the military during his presidency, particularly in the latter half. He managed the Iran hostage crisis, though critics often focus on the drawn-out resolution. I think the hostages were taken over 400 days they were in captivity for. And he advocated for environmental conservation, expanding the national park system and promoting energy conservation.
Carter left the presidency aged 56, relatively young for a president, and life after being the president of the United States could be very unforgiving. George Washington retired to his plantation in Virginia and died 2 years later. Lyndon B. Johnson decided against a second run for office and died 4 years later. President Nixon resigned after Watergate and spent the rest of his life in political wilderness. President Carter, on the other hand, reinvented the post-presidency, leading to nearly 45 years of public service after the White House.
Together, the Carters set up the Carter Center in 1982. The center, nestled on the outskirts of Atlanta, is a non-profit organization dedicated to advancing peace, human rights, and global health. Carter helped raise the funds and awareness to eradicate little-known diseases stalking Central Africa. He monitored over 100 elections worldwide and offered his negotiation skills to broker peace deals. And also, when I was out in the US, which I think we mentioned in a previous episode, I managed to get up to the Carter Presidential Center, which I was so pleased about while he was still alive, because I generally felt a genuine connection when you go to that place. And when I was walking around, there was a Girl Guides of America Gold Award event with lots of little girls sort of like presenting their research and other things like that. So I think it was like a living embodiment of what the center was meant to be. It's not just this place where people go to look at a bit of history. It's actually still a place that's very much alive and is actively helping the community and the wider world as well.
Interestingly, Jimmy Carter had both a personal and a professional relationship with India. One of the few presidents back in the 90s who actually visited India. On a state visit to India in 1978, he attempted to rekindle diplomatic relations following their deterioration during the Nixon years. During that visit, Jimmy Carter visited a village outside New Delhi where his mother, Lillian, worked as a nurse in the 1960s when she was part of the Peace Corps. In honor of his visit, the village was renamed to Carterpuri. Apart from that, he authored numerous books on topics ranging from politics to religion and poetry, showcasing his intellectual depth. Additionally, he actively worked with Habitat for Humanity, helping build affordable housing across the United States and beyond. He was also dedicated to his community of Plains, Georgia, where he preached often at the local Baptist church. Lastly, he became the longest living United States president, reflecting on his life's work with humility and gratitude.
I did not know about Carterpuri, Sid. That is very interesting. I did not
That
know
is
Yeah.
pretty cool, isn't it?
It is,
Um,
and it's still called that. And especially when the news came out that he had passed away, they did like a small tribute to him over there. And the village has not been changed. The name has not been changed since ever. And it was mentioned in one of the tributes by the U.S. ambassador to India as well.
That's awesome.
cool. That's awesome. Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
tidbit that I did not know. That is awesome. The legacy of President Carter lives on in many ways and will probably be defined more by what he achieved after his presidency. For most of his 100 years, he dedicated himself to the service of others, his faith, and his devotion to his country. As President Biden noted, for anyone in search of what it means to live a life of purpose and meaning, the good life, study Jimmy Carter, a man of principle, faith, and humility. And I also wanted to add former President Barack Obama, who I thought of immediately when we're talking about living life after presidency, because of course Obama was so young when he was president. And now I think so many people have been watching the Obamas and wondering, what they're doing now and what they're going to do next. And I know as soon as President Obama stopped being president, I immediately was like, be on the Supreme Court. That was my first thought, but I think he deserves a rest. So, anyways, President Obama also expressed profound admiration for Jimmy Carter's life and legacy. And in a heartfelt tribute, Obama highlighted Carter's unwavering commitment to integrity, respect, and compassion, noting that he, quote, taught all of us what it means to live a life of grace, dignity, justice, and service. So, lots of amazing words in there. I think that we've covered pretty much every compliment that we possibly could in this episode, but that was the man that Jimmy Carter was.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I always find quite sad when people, prominence or anyone actually passes away is all the lovely things that people say about them. And I hope that he knew that how much he was admired. And I think it's probably quite easy to, there's always this thing of like looking on the past in rose-tinted glasses, but Carter was very much, he stood out in his demeanor in comparison to the people that that his predecessors, Richard Nixon, who had completely disgraced himself, and then Ford, who was sort of very associated with that time. And he became, he was the outsider, honest Jimmy, his family campaigned with him, when I was going around the presidential center at one point, there were 11 members of his family campaigning in different states around the US during the campaign. It was a very sort of small campaign in comparison to what you think about the Harris campaign, for example, in the most recent presidential election. And he approached things in a very different way, so much that the extent that he wanted to reduce the sort of pageantry that associated with the president. And when he left the White House, Ronald Reagan brought it all back because Reagan was like the ultimate showman. He sort of recreated this image of what a president is meant to look and sound like. And President Carter was very different to that. He was sort of quite folksy, charming, very good on a human level, but maybe didn't have the gravitas that we often associate with the presidency. I don't know if you guys had any other thoughts about the tributes that have been paid and maybe his legacy as well, or anything you sort of learned about him.
No, absolutely. I think Jimmy Carter is a man who wrote his own legacy and he lived it. He was there to see it. He built it, be it negotiating with North Korea to release journalists from there or to, set up something as important as the Department of Energy back in the 1970s. I think two contrasting achievements, and yet they still last, and he's still there. And one of the big things, of course, is that all of these things that he's done, he was even awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a huge achievement for an individual to be given. I think he's lived a life of example. He's lived, especially post presidency, which can be very brutal, and he was there relentlessly. And I still remember one of those pictures which I saw when I think Obama became president, where all the former living presidents were there together in one photo in the Oval Office, and he was there in that photo, and I was like, wow, here's a guy from the 70s. He's still there. He's still kicking it. And it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Throughout just listening to us talk, and I've been really trying to find a way to end everything with a positive spin, at least at the beginning of 2025, because I think we ended it in a dark place in 2024. But I think that Jimmy Carter is a great example of someone who made so much change and had such a positive impact out of politics. And I think this is exactly what we were talking about when we did our US election rundown. Throughout all of these different elections that took place in 2024, people might be feeling like politics isn't for them, or maybe hopeless about the situation that they might be in with government in their countries. But I think that this is a perfect testament to what you can do aside from politics. You don't have to make change politically. You can, that is one way. And Jimmy Carter did both. He did it in politics, but arguably he made so much more change outside of politics. So I think he's a great testament to that. And really just being the change that he wanted to see in the world, which is of course my favorite quote. So I think
Absolutely.
just wanted to end it with a positive spin, because that's my resolution. We'll end more political dispatch episodes with a positive note in 2025.
Being more uplifting. And I
Yeah.
think I'll add to that as well, Lily, by something President Carter said. And he said, I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I have to try to make a difference. And I think that sort of is what we're all trying to do on this podcast and all part of the network as well. So he lived an extraordinary life and helped a lot of people, and hopefully it inspires more people of every generation. Like President Biden said, if you want to see a life, you should look to the biography of President Jimmy Carter.
I think that is a great way to wrap it up. Any other thoughts, Sid?
I think we should definitely add like one in honor of Jimmy Carter, I suppose, like a good news segment at the end of each of our episodes, like on good news from politics, which I'm sure we'll definitely find. There'll be some example that we can definitely find, and I think that'll be nice. That'll be our little tribute to him.
Yeah. Look forward to that in the next episode.
Yes.
But that brings us to the end of today's episode, a short and sweet one to kick off the new year. Thank you for joining us on the Political Dispatch as we discussed the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter.
We would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the podcast. We would also love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so please leave us a rating or a comment wherever you're listening to this podcast now.
Thanks, everyone. See you in the next episode of the Political Dispatch.